Hi, everybody. This is SAAD. As you know, the past week I've spent quite a bit of time talking about the Gillette ad and toxic masculinity and so on. And then I remembered that several years ago there was a infamous article that made the rounds, and I thought it might be relevant to our conversation over the past few days. It's from a man who certainly doesn't need to be exposed to the Gillette ad because he's already the new definition of manhood, a true feminist. As a matter of fact, the article, this is by Michael Sonmore, published on July 16, 2015, What Open Marriage Taught One Man About Feminism. And I'll just read it and you decide what you want to think of it. As I write this, my children are asleep in their room. Loretta Lynn is on the stereo, and my wife is out on a date with a man named Paolo. Luckily for him, he's not named Rocco Ziffretti. Look up that reference. It's her second date this week, her fourth this month so far. If it goes like the others, she'll come home in the middle of the night, crawl into bed beside me, and tell me all about how she and Paolo had sex. I won't explode with anger or seethe with resentment. Only toxically masculine men would do that. I'll tell her it's a hot story, and I'm glad she had fun. It's hot because she's excited, and I'm glad because I'm a feminist. Before my wife started sleeping with other men, I certainly considered myself a feminist, but I really only understood it in the abstract. When I quit working to stay at home with the kids, I began to understand it on a whole new level. I'm an economically dependent house husband, coping with the withering drudgery of child rearing. Now that I understand the reality of that situation, I don't blame women for demanding more for themselves than the life of the housewife. Excuse me. Still, as a man, I could, if I wanted to, portray what I'm doing as work and thus claim for myself the prestige men traditionally derive from work. Whenever I tell someone I stay home with the kids, they invariably say, hardest work in the world. They say this because the only way to account for a man at home with the kids is to say what he's doing is hard work. But there's a subtext in the compliment that makes it backhanded. We both know no one ever says it to a woman. Mothers care, fathers provide care. The difference is crucial. Despite my total withdrawal from the economy and the traditional sources of masculine identity, I can still argue I'm a provider. I provide care. In this way, my masculine self-image was stretched but not broken. Diaper bag notwithstanding, I was still a man, capitalized. It wasn't until my wife mentioned one evening that she'd kissed another man and liked it and wanted to do more than kiss next time that I realized how my status as a man, capitalized, depended on a single fact, that my wife fucked only me. When people ask how it started, I say this: we married young, she'd had sex before me, but only with a handful of people, a handful of times. She never had a boyfriend, never had a lover. I was the first man she ever had the chance to get to know intimately. By her mid-30s, having already had our children and entering her sexual prime, she felt keenly her lack of sexual experience. Happily for me, she was willing to talk about it, willing to ask if I'd be open to exploring other options. We opened a bottle of wine and started talking and talking and talking. And this guy's really, what a man. She didn't present it as an issue of feminism to me, but after much soul-searching about why the idea of my wife having sex with other men bothered me, I came to a few conclusions. Monogamy meant I controlled her sexual expression, and not to get all women's studies major about it, Patriarchal oppression essentially boils down to a man's fear that a woman with sexual agency is a woman he can't control. Well, you're partly right in that men have devised all sorts of cultural and religious means to control women's sexuality. That is absolutely right. I've written about it in my evolutionary work. I've lectured about it. But they do it for one evolutionary reason, and that is because of paternity uncertainty. Humans are a biparental species. We need to invest heavily in our children. Both parents do. And therefore, it doesn't make sense for a heavily invested biparental species to have the sex that does have genetic uncertainty, which is men, to not care about not being cuckolded. So the reason why men care about being cuckolded is not because they suffer from toxic masculinity and need Gillette ad therapy. It's because you and I and most of the people watching, all of the people watching this clip, come from ancestors where the men cared greatly about not being cuckolded by the women with whom they're forming long-term pair bonds. We aren't afraid of their intellect or their spirit or their ability to bear children. We are afraid that when it comes time for sex, they won't choose us. This petty fear, this petty fear that is rooted in the most basal evolutionary principles. So this petty fear has led us as a culture to place judgments on the entire spectrum of female sexual expression. If a woman likes sex, she's a whore and a slut. Not true. Absolutely not true. That itself is a stereotype that is frankly incorrect. Innumerable men appreciate greatly that their women enjoy sex. As a matter of fact, many of them will complain that their women are not sufficiently compelled to have sex. So the idea that all men think that women who enjoy sex are somehow ascribe pejorative adjectives is complete nonsense. If she only likes sex with her husband or boyfriend, she's boring and lame. If she doesn't like sex at all, she's frigid and unfeeling. Every option is a trap. Feminism always comes back to sex, even when we're talking about everything else. The point isn't that all women should be sexual adventurers. Celibacy is as valid an expression of sexuality as profligacy. I hope I pronounced that properly. Non-sex is just another form of sexuality. Slavery is another form of freedom. Death is another way of living. Good stuff. Your degree from Oberlin College is coming in nice and handy, or maybe I should say Wellesley College. The point is that it should be women who choose, not men, even the men they're married to. As a matter of fact, women do choose. Sexual selection in most species is driven by female mate choice. So we didn't need this feminist male to tell us that. It's the defining feature of the evolutionary trajectory of countless species. All right, let's go on. For my wife, the choice between honoring our vows and fulfilling her desires was a false choice, another trap. She knew how deep our love was and knew that her wanting a variety of sexual experiences as we traveled through life together would not diminish or disrupt that love. It took me about 6 months, many long, intense conversations, and an ocean of red wine before I knew it too. When my wife told me she wanted to open our marriage and take other lovers, she wasn't rejecting me. She was embracing herself. When I understood that, I finally became a feminist. Sorry, I'm choked up. This is very moving. That was 2 years ago, and today we've never been happier, more in tune, closer, tighter, stronger. Whatever power I surrendered, I don't miss. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but I tell everyone it works for us. And I should mention, live and let live. If this works for them, that's fine. But it's the Gillette ad tone that I take issue with. How does it work? We take turns going out. We have small children, age 6 and 3. One of us stays home. We don't like to use babysitters because it gives us a curfew. We'd rather go out unfettered than worry about turning into a pumpkin at midnight. Going out alone to hooking up with others was an easy transition. It does work both ways. And yes, I too enjoy sexual carte blanche. I just don't use mine as much as my wife uses hers. Of course you don't. What's important is equality of opportunity, not outcome. Look at this man. Feminist man. How does it feel? It feels great, mostly. Most of the time, it feels like a mature, responsible way to address our needs and desires within our loving, mutually supportive marriage. It feels very adult, especially because it depends on open, honest communication. We take great pride in all the talking we do. I meet a lot of people who say they'll never get married because they don't want to get divorced, and hearing it always makes me sad because they are cutting themselves off from the possibility of the magic that happens when two people share their lives. People don't divorce because they can't stand sharing anymore. They divorce because they feel like they can't share anymore. I never forget that my wife is a whole person unto herself, a complete and dynamic individual, and though we are together, we're not one. Too often people get trapped in the roles of husband and wife, and a gulf opens between what they think they should be and who they really are. Opening our marriage has allowed us to close that gap so that the person I call wife is the same person my wife sees in the mirror. Lying to each other begins with lying to yourself, and now we don't have to lie to anyone. There are, of course, moments of jealousy, resentment, and insecurity. Recently, my wife went on a date and fell asleep at his apartment. I hadn't heard from her since 10 p.m. She still wasn't home at 6 a.m. My texts went unanswered and my calls went to voicemail. A tight knot of dread lodged in my stomach as I imagined all kinds of dire scenarios and realized that I not only didn't know where she was, I had no idea whom she was with. I pictured myself going to the police, saying, I think she's in a red hook with a guy named Ryan. I don't know his last name, but I think he's a graphic designer. No, his name is Rocco Siffredi. Check out that reference. I'm not sure there's actually a word for the unique blend of acute terror and unforgivable shame I felt that morning, imagining that I'd lost my wife to Ryan, Rocco Siffredi, the maybe graphic designer. When she finally texted me at 7:30 a.m., relief coursed through me like morphine. She wrote, fuck, 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 fuck. I'm so sorry. Fell asleep, I replied. Just glad you're okay. But next time, no radio silence. Remember, you're not alone. This guy is fantastic. He's my absolute hero. What surprises most people is when I tell them that it's not the sex with other men that bothers me. Pay attention here because I'm going to break out the evolutionary theory in a second. The sex is the easy part, the fun part. It's what the sex connects to, stands for, reveals that can be difficult. I don't want her to fall in love with anyone else, and every time she goes on a date, I confront the possibility that she might. It happened at the beginning. The first person she dated after we opened up fell hard in love with her, and my wife, overwhelmed by his ardor, tried to love him back. Watching it happen, I was confused, angry, and terrified that she wanted to leave me. She assured me she didn't, and whatever feelings she had for me didn't lessen what she felt for me. Believing her then was the ultimate trust exercise. We survived because eventually I did believe her, and also because I learned to trust myself. Let me summarize here something that is profoundly important, something that I've discussed in the past. There are studies by my good friend David Buss and other colleagues looking at the evolutionary roots of romantic jealousy. And the idea is that it's not that men or women are more jealous in a romantic context. It's that the triggers of jealousy are different. Men are much more triggered by sexual infidelity, whereas women are a lot more triggered by emotional infidelity. In other words, if you ask men to imagine their partners either engaging in sexual or emotional infidelity. Emotional infidelity here means that you form a tight emotional bond with no sex, versus sexual infidelity would be, say, you have sex with someone else, but there is no bond. Men respond much more adversely if they imagine their woman having sex with another man. Women, on the other hand, have a greater stress response to emotional infidelity. And the evolutionary reasons are very simple. For men, the greatest threat to their evolutionary interests is to be cuckolded. Therefore, they've evolved the cognitive, the emotional, the behavioral systems to try to thwart that particular evolutionary threat. They don't tolerate sharing of their women sexually. Not because of toxic masculinity, not because of the patriarchy, because of this little thing called biology. Women, on the other hand, while of course they're not happy with sexual infidelity of their partners, emotional infidelity is a greater predictor of a man leaving the union. Therefore, they respond even more harshly to emotional infidelity. Well, this guy's response is exactly that of a woman. Not only when given the choice to have a, quote, hall pass, he uses it less than his wife, which itself is not the typical pattern that you would see, but the pattern of sexual versus emotional infidelity that he experiences is exactly that of typical of a woman. So, sure, he's a man, but he's a very feminine man. Dare I say, a castrated man. This has been the great challenge of my open marriage, to draw strength from vulnerability. Doing so requires supreme self-confidence. You must first really, truly love yourself. Absolutely. The only way I will ever feel that I'm truly self-confident and truly love myself is when I give carte blanche for my wife to head off on a little getaway with Rocco Siffredi. That's when I'll know that I am a man that transcends the pettiness of jealousy inherent to toxic masculinity. Until then, I shall remain a small, small man. It is the foundation upon which all the other love is built. From everywhere comes the message that what I'm doing is for weaklings, losers, failures, pussies, that if I had money and status, I could keep my wife in line, that her self-discovery comes at the expense of my self-esteem. My open marriage has made heavy demands on my ability to silence the voice of doubt in my head, that gnawing feeling of worthlessness. But I find I can meet those demands, and that I'm able to build my self-confidence out of nothing more than the basic dignity we all possess. I'm grateful to my wife for pushing us to take this leap, and whatever happens to us in the future, I would do it all again. And when she comes home tonight and crawls into bed beside me with a hot story about her date with Paolo, Rocco Siffredi, she'll do it all again, too. There you have it, folks. There's nothing else for me to say. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.